But John's Passion account is very different from the three synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. The Passion account in those Gospels tends to focus on Jesus' suffering and the terrible pain and death that the crucifixion was. You know, they focus on Jesus bleeding. You don't have that in John's Gospel. In the Synoptic Gospels, Jesus' passion and death is done to him. In John's Gospel, Jesus chooses the passion and death. It's very clear. He's in charge. He's choosing to do this in obedience to his Father. God didn't want the Son to die, suffer and die. That wasn't the point. What God wanted from the Son was obedience, which Jesus never faltered from. Jesus was always faithful to his Father's will. What was his cry in the agony in the garden? Very human cry. Take this cup from me. I don't want any part of this. No idiot chooses, or only idiots choose suffering. And then I begin to wonder about them. We don't choose suffering. We undergo suffering. My sister-in-law just had a knee replacement and she's finding it painful. You know, she undergoes it because she's looking down the line when she's going to be able to walk right again. You know, we might choose suffering for a good end, but just suffering for suffering's sake, we would never choose it. Why did Jesus suffer and die? Because he was always faithful to his Father's will. And that angered the leadership at the time. The leadership, some of the Pharisees and Sadducees, were kind of taking people away from the covenantal, loving relationship with God and focusing on keeping law for law's sake. You know, you can walk 20 steps on the Sabbath, but not 21. You can't lift a finger on the Sabbath. And you know, what is Jesus saying? Which one of you idiots, if your sheep fell into a whatever, you wouldn't go in and get it because that's worth money? Well, what are you doing by keeping all these crazy laws for law's sake that aren't really helping you delve more deeply into living the covenant? And Jesus said, I've not come to abolish the law. The law's still there, for us as well. I've come to fulfill it, which says we don't keep God's laws because they're God's laws, simply for that reason. We keep God's laws because they're God's divine guidance for us to keep our covenantal, loving relationship with God. And that's what we have to keep our eye on. If we're only concerned with keeping law, we miss the whole point. But don't do it. Don't do it. The law in itself is not saving. What is saving is our relationship with God. So baptismal preparation. We join with those preparing for baptism because nicely with the renewed rite now, we all renew our baptisms at Easter time, if not at the vigil. Then we renew our baptismal vows. Most parishes, I think, at the Sunday Masses also include that. Don't take that lightly. That's where Lent is going. Lent is about conversion so that when you renew those vows at Easter time, it can be a true renewal of self turning toward God. That's what this is about. All right. Lent, our 6-week period here, is a time to assess where we are spiritually with God. With each other. You know, are you in a better place with God now than you were last year this time? It's a good question to ask. We should be able to see, this is the whole purpose of the liturgical year, we should be able to see our growth, not day by day. We're too short-sighted for that. But when we take time in Lent to look back, where was I spiritually last year? Is my prayer life a little bit better this year? Are my relationships with my family and my friends, my co-workers at work, are those a little bit stronger, a little bit better Am I a little bit more patient? Have I improved on some of the language maybe I should be using? Yeah, we got a couple men here. That was a sexist statement, wasn't it?
I would say so.
Hey, but when it's to our advantage, we'll use it. So Lent is a time for assessment, a time to look back and spur ourselves on. Preparation for Lent is really all about what in my life do I need to do to change, so that when I renew my baptismal promises on Easter, I can do that with full spirit, knowing that I've come someplace. The other interesting thing, we'll come back to this later this morning, but the other interesting thing about our Lenten is, when I was a kid, I remember, back in those days, Lent was finished at noon on Holy Saturday. Somebody remember that? Yes. I remember, I had to be little, I always marked where I am in my childhood by where we lived, because we moved a lot. But I can remember sitting in our little house in Dayton, at our little white kitchen table, with the sucker unwrapped, looking at the clock, and I was enough to know when the big hand hit 12, and it went. That's not at all what the Lenten penance is supposed to be about. What our Lenten practices are to be about is changing how we are with God and others. But when Lent's over, the practice doesn't stop. When Lent's over, hopefully in these 6 weeks we've formed a good habit that improves our relationship with God and others. And as soon as Lent's over, we don't give up the good habit to go back to our old bad habits. We continue the good habits. So think of Lent as a practice time in changing how I live. And that's going to be different for every one of us. Giving up candy isn't going to fit everyone. It's going to be different. So what is Lent essentially about? Deeply looking in ourselves and asking, what do I need to change within myself to give as a gift to God at Easter? This conversion, this change, this good habit that I've formed, that I will continue even after Easter Sunday, because it's habit now for me. It's a good habit. I would not want to stop. I've always found in my own life that the better we keep Lent, the more joyful is Easter. The better we keep Lent, the more joyful is Easter. Not just because I can have my candy. We're joyful in Easter because we know we've taken some steps along the journey toward sharing eternally in the very life that we're celebrating in Easter. As well as you keep Lent, that is how joyful you will be at Easter. And whatever the practice during Lent that you chose in order to overcome some habit that keeps you from growing in your love of God and others, after 6 weeks practice, that kind of becomes second nature. It's a little easier. And then we do it without even thinking about it. And that's part of the joy of Easter as well. That's the gift we give to God in Easter. All right, let's look at a little bit of the history of baptism, because I think it will help us understand why often we have a wrong idea or struggle with what Lent is truly all about. Easter as a celebration did not come about until mid-2nd century. That's about the year 150. That's pretty late, isn't it? That's about 100 and some years after Jesus died. Before that, the only celebration that the church had was Sunday. Celebrating the Lord's Supper, celebrating Eucharist on Sunday. That's all they needed. That was the high point of their week. Daily Mass doesn't enter in until about the 6th century. So the community gathering point and celebration was for Sunday Mass, but also the Christian community gathered morning and evening for morning and evening prayer, what we now call the breviary or the Liturgy of the Hours. So the usual daily prayer of the church was the Liturgy of the Hours that led the community to and from the Sunday Mass celebration. That's the celebration of resurrection. We're going to look at that in Thursday a week when we look at the Triduum of Easter. So, Lent doesn't come about until Easter comes about. By mid-2nd century, the Christian communities decided they wanted an annual celebration of resurrection that was far more festive than their weekly celebration around the time that Jesus would have actually suffered and died, which meant basically in the springtime. So as I've already said, Lent then, a preparation for this Easter celebration, was a 3-week fast as baptismal preparation. Now, they never fasted on Saturday and Sunday. Saturday being the Sabbath, Sunday being the celebration of Easter. So they weren't at this early point concerned about days. They were concerned about what they were doing during this 3-week period, namely a continuous reading of St. John's Gospel, culminating with the Passion on Friday. They did introduce a 40-hour fast. 40 is an important biblical number. Israel wandered 40 years in the desert. It rained 40 days and 40 nights for Noah. Almost always, it seems, when there's a covenant involved, the number 40 comes in. Before Jesus began his public ministry, that was two Sundays ago, gospel. What was the gospel? He went out into the desert to pray and to prepare for this tremendous work of salvation that he was on. So 40 is important. So what they did in the early church is they introduced a 40-hour solemn fast before the celebration of Easter, which began at sundown on Saturday and continued through sunrise on what we call now Easter Sunday. This 40-hour fast was a solemn fast, which meant all they had was bread and water. It began with sundown on Holy Thursday, and then the fast was broken with receiving communion at the Easter sunrise Mass. So that was a solemn fast. And by the way, that still is on our liturgical calendar, the 40-hour solemn fast through the Paschal Triduum. We'll look at that shortly. This 40-hour fast divided this Sunday from all others. Obviously, they couldn't do a 40-hour fast every week. They'd be fast all the time. The usual fast days in the early church for Christians was they fasted every Wednesday, every Friday, and every Saturday. So those were fast days for them. We grumbled about Fridays. So kind of be glad that you were born as late as you are. A little bit more demanding in the early church. As I've already said, the 40-hour fast included Friday and Saturday, so it began with sundown on Holy Thursday. They counted days from sundown to sundown, not from midnight to midnight as we count them now. It came when it was introduced when the Pasch shifted to Sunday, and it kind of just got added on to the usual Friday fast. So it wasn't completely new, it was just a little bit longer than they usually had. The reason for the fast is found in Mark chapter 2, verses 19 to 20. We fast when the bridegroom is not with us. You know, when the Pharisees are complaining that John the Baptist's followers, disciples, all were fasting and Jesus' disciples were all eating, you know, what's wrong with you? And Jesus said, the bridegroom is present. You can't fast when the bridegroom is present. You fast when the bridegroom is absent. And when is the bridegroom absent? From the death on Good Friday through until the resurrection on Easter Sunday. So Mark gives us the reason for the fast. The fast quickens our longing for promised return of the bridegroom, which receives its corporate expression in the Paschal Vigil. The bridegroom is in the tomb. And now we are waiting for this resurrection moment. It finds its fulfillment in baptism and Eucharist, wherein the Lord establishes his abiding presence in the church. And there's a double presence there. Through baptism within us, which I think we don't often think about, and we need to think about it more often. You've heard me say probably more than once, we are the body of Christ. And I think the greatest gift of baptism, we focus so much on original sin that we miss, I think, the greatest gift of baptism. And that is God's life that is given to us, And in being given God's life, that means God dwells within us. The Holy Spirit dwells within us. We are temples of the Holy Spirit. I learned that in catechism. I had no idea what that meant. You know? Okay, so I'm a temple of the Holy Spirit, then I go on. If we really understood what it meant to be temples of the Holy Spirit, what it meant to have God truly dwelling within us, I think that would be a bit of a deterrent to sin, wouldn't it? How could we be less than charitable and loving to another person when I look at that other person and say, God is present in that person, and for others, myself as well. Fasting and 40-hour fast was an invitation to faith, that is the invitation to faith on Good Friday, is answered at the Paschal Vigil where we celebrate new life. That's what this is all about. During this early period, fast is entirely directed to participation in the Paschal Sacrament, baptism, confirmation, and Eucharist. Not only for those receiving for the first time, but for those of us renewed. So the fast is not understood as a discipline in itself. It takes us someplace. And where it takes us is into the very life that we seek. All right? All right, let's look at 4th century. Now, 4th century, the church starts growing. Beginning of the 4th century, year 313, Constantine issued the Edict of Milan, which gave the Catholic Church, for Christianity, freedom in the empire. Before that, you could be persecuted and even martyred because paganism was the official religion of the empire. Christianity, through the Edict of Milan, Constantine said, okay, that's it, no more persecution of these people. They're good people in the empire, we will accept them. All right? So 4th century is a huge shift in the church because with persecution gone, the church grew. They could be more public about the way they lived their faith. And so the church began to grow. 4th century then introduced a 40-period day of Lent. So now we go from 40-hour fast to a 40-day fast. All right. So in the 4th century, where we have the baptismal preparation, the catechumenate really growing and flowering and taking structure, we introduced a 40-day period of Lent. It was called Quadragesima, which is the Latin for 40. And it included 40 consecutive days preceding the Paschal Triduum, which was Thursday night through Sunday evening. Now, this is interesting. How I'm always amazed when I pick up this history, how well they thought this stuff through and how much they capitalized on symbolism. It just blows my mind. Holy Thursday was the last day of Lent and not part of the Triduum. The Triduum began with sundown on Holy Thursday. So if you take out the Sundays of that 40-day period, Sundays are never fast days. You know, even during Lent, they're not fast days. I was bringing a couple of our elderly sisters up to Coldwater, 15, 20 years ago, for a funeral visitation at funeral home. And it was Lent time, and somehow I said something about I love the Sundays of Lent because it's a feast day for me. Whatever I give enough, I eat. You know, and little dear sister Consuelo was sitting in the front seat by me, and she looked at me, and she had this bored look on her face. She said, "You mean I've been wasting all these Sundays?" So every Lent after that, I would go knock on her door at the beginning of Lent and say, "Remember, you can do whatever you want on Sundays of Lent." And again, every Sunday, even in Lent, is a celebration of resurrection. The bridegroom is with us. And so we don't fast, because the bridegroom is with us. All right, now here's what's interesting about this 40-day period. When we take out 6 weeks, take out the 6 Sundays, which are not fast days, we end up with just 34 fasting days. Follow me? 40 minus 6 is 34. Now, add to that the 2 days of the solemn Paschal fast. What we have is 36 fast days. And they understood that as 1/10 of the year. Forget the other 5 days. Well, this year we have 6 days because we're in a leap year, you know. The calendars weren't as exact as our own calendars right now. But they understood 36 fast days to be the tithe of their life given to God. The tithe is always 10%. It's kind of historically all over the place. So isn't that fascinating? And isn't that a beautiful symbolism That Lent is the discipline that I acquired during Lent is the tithe of my life that I give to God as a gift. I just think that's a beautiful symbolism. The duration of Lent is not coextensive with Paschal fast. Paschal fast, Lent now is longer than the Paschal fast, because the Triduum is Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. During this period, fast is part of the discipline to acquire inner purities. Now we've got a little bit of a shift going on. Fasting is not immediately connected with baptism now, but more connected with spiritual discipline, acquiring the inner purity to be in right relationship. Fasting is not an addition to faith life, but an expression of it. If my faith is a matter of loving God, then I want to undertake certain practices at a certain time to bring my life in order with loving God. It includes prayer and almsgiving. The Ash Wednesday Gospel tells us or talks about fasting, prayer, and almsgiving, or prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. Actually, the Gospel starts with almsgiving, prayer, and fasting, and I find that interesting. But when you look at those three areas of practice, prayer directs ourselves to God, doesn't it? Fasting directs ourselves to ourselves, and almsgiving directs ourselves to others. So we want to choose some kind of Lenten discipline in all three of those areas, because that's helping us reflect on the three relationships that either move us along the journey of salvation or move us backwards. Our relationship with God, our relationship with self, and our relationship with others. And those three relationships are intertwined. If one of them begins to weaken or fall apart, then it's going to affect the other two. How I treat others affects how I regard God, and ultimately actually reflects how I regard myself. If I don't regard myself well, if I don't take care of myself, I've been calling Pop every night to see how she's doing with her therapy, and basically I keep saying to her, take care of yourself. She's busy all the time. She does more on service projects than 5 people. But I keep telling her, take care of yourself. This is the time when you got to think about you. That's awfully hard for her, You hear me, dear? I'm not going to call her tonight, so I just had to get that in.
We can all give her a buzz.
It's completely synonymous with the Christian life itself. Why? Because those three practices direct us to the three sets of relationships. It derives its efficacy from the cross. Why did Jesus suffer on the cross? Because he completely did his Father's will. And those three relationships are strengthened in our own lives when we do the Father's will. So that the cross is our inspiration. The character of Lent cannot be defined exclusively in terms of fasting. It's much larger than that. But a reminder to live new life. A reminder to conversion. A reminder to change ourselves so we're more like Christ when we celebrate the Easter mystery. It's a yearly reminder of our own initiation. All right, now we're still in pretty good shape. 4th century. 6th century, things start getting really messed up. The 6th century was a bad century as far as I'm concerned, and we've come in a bad place ever since, up until Vatican II. So we had a long history of the church of bad. What happened in the 6th century? The Roman Empire was falling apart. Feudalism, the Dark Ages are all very much part of the history. The church had kind of become a two-tier church. The clergy at the top going to get to heaven, and the lay people at the bottom of the heap basically not able to get to heaven. That was kind of the whole general theory there. So by the 6th century, the value of fasting as an ascetic exercise increased enormously. What that says is people fasted for fasting's sake. So it was the discipline of fasting that earned us grace. There was no thought to, why am I doing this to improve relationship, to move forward. It led to longer and longer periods of prescribed Pasch before the celebration of Easter. So by the 7th century, We had the addition of Quinquagesima Sunday. Some of us remember that. Some of us are old enough. In the pre-Vatican II days means 50, so that's 50 days. Then they added Sexagesima Sunday, which is 60 days. Then they added Septuagesima Sunday, 70. And I remember as a kid, the three Sundays before the first Sunday of Lent were Septuagesima, Sexagesima, Quinquagesima. And I remember coming home and saying, "Mommy, what are these about?" She said, "I don't know." We didn't start on Lenten fast back then, I remember. But somehow they were connected to Lent. And it was very confusing, not only to me, but I think to the adults. I don't even think the priests understood. They just kind of, it came out of this attitude that began creeping in the 6th century, where basically we were such bad sinners, we probably had no chance at all to get to heaven. At best, you could make it to purgatory. And that was certainly better than hell. Not much, but at least a little better. So they kept extending the fast. The fast longer than 40 days, however, faced resistance, but drew attention to a fast of 40 days. If Jesus was in the desert 40 days fast, then we might want to do that. So by the 8th, 9th century, all right, Ash Wednesday received its determination. So what happens is we back up 5 days before the first Sunday of Lent to make up for the Sundays of Lent, which are not fast days. So hopefully get 40 fast days. And that actually calendar-wise works out, but we still got a problem. Because March 19th, the feast, the Solemnity of St. Joseph, and March 25th, the Solemnity of the Annunciation, are almost always falling during Lent. And solemnities are like Sundays. They're not fast days. I love it, and I've already checked, and neither happens this year. I'm going leave year. I love it when either March 19th or March 25th falls on a Friday in Lent. I mean, that's just a double goodie. I'm a meat eater, and I have a steak on those Fridays. That reminds me, the abstinence rule in the United States on the Fridays of Lent is a decision by our bishops' conference. Not all countries, not all bishops' conferences made that decision. So the 9 years I lived in Canada, I could eat meat on Good Friday. Or not on Good Friday, that's Universal Western Church. I could eat meat on other Fridays in Lent. So that's a local custom. So I think for us in the United States, it's kind of good to know that it's our bishops that have decided. The only universal abstinence days and also fast are Ash Wednesday and Good Friday in the entire Western Church. That comes from Rome. Our Friday abstinence in the United States comes from our U.S. bishops. They decided that we would increase that. They were actually talking a number of years ago at one of their conference meetings about reintroducing the Friday abstinence rule in the church every Friday, not just Lent, but every Friday. And one astute bishop said, "If I go out and have lobster on Friday, that's hardly penance." But I think it's good to remember that in 1966, we'll look at that moment when Pope Paul VI issued an apostolic exhortation called De Penitentia, on penance. That's when the Friday abstinence rule during the year in the United States was relaxed. So, and all the people heard was we cannot eat meat on Fridays, and it's not a mortal sin. What we didn't hear Pope Paul VI say is Friday is still a day of penance. So we are still required to do some kind of penance on Friday, because if every Sunday is a celebration of Easter, then every Friday is a celebration of the cross. So if you're not thinking about that, you might want to start thinking about that. That there's a rhythm to our week. And I know in my own life, if I keep Friday as an important day of some kind of conscious penance, my Sunday Mass is different. And by the way, the communion fast, which now is down to 1 hour, which means absolutely nothing. Some of us are old enough to remember when I made my first communion, we weren't even allowed to have water after midnight yet. Then they changed it to be able to drink water. We thought we died and went to heaven. But the point to fasting is to hunger. And the point to fasting in relation to Holy Communion or in relation to the Easter Sunday celebration is, in terms of Holy Communion, to hunger for that food, which is the only food that truly fills us. The point to the fasting, the hunger during Lent, is to hunger for that life, risen life, which is the only life that is eternal. So fasting and hunger go together. But again, the hunger has a purpose. We're hungering for something, not just a sucker. We're hungering for the heavenly food that only God can give. Let me see, I get off on track as I think of these things. So we have 8th, 9th century Ash Wednesday received as good determination. And Ash Wednesday, the imposition of ashes as a sign of penance, is really a leftover of a rite that was introduced in the 4th century called the Order of Penitence, where community members who had committed grave, scandalous sin and caused scandal within the community had to do public penance to be readmitted to the community. It was kind of, the Order of Penitence was kind of a parallel to the Order of Catechumens, those preparing for baptism. And what those introduced to the Order of Penitence did was they put on sackcloth and ashes and begged the community for prayer and for forgiveness. So the imposition of ashes on Ash Wednesday is a leftover of that early rite that reminds us that Lent is a penitential season, not just in terms of the practices we choose, but the entire season has an atmosphere of penance around it. Now, we don't wear those ashes all through Lent. In the early church, they did. It's in the 6th century that private confession with emphasis on frequency had implanted itself. Prior to 6th century, and that didn't exist. Even in the 6th century, it isn't a sacrament yet, as we understand it. Faithful expected to confess sins. By the 9th century, when it comes to be understood as a sacrament, you can only confess your sins to your pastor. And it was kind of a sneaky way for the manor lord in the feudal system to know what was going on his manor, because usually it was one of his sons who happened to be the priest. And they didn't have seminary or lots of training back then. You just basically set yourself up as a priest. There was a new rite introduced composed of obsolete elements of canonical public penance, the Order of Penitence, received ashes as a sign of solidarity with Adam's sin and death. And one of the two choices for imposition of ashes even now is dust you are and to dust you shall return. Before Adam and Eve sinned, we were immortal. We would have never faced death. It was Adam and Eve's sin that introduced death in the world. Sunday and major feasts were never fast days, so the continuity of the season is still constantly broken up. Yeah. Now, what really happened that kind of messed things up during this time, from the 6th up until the revision of Holy Week in 1955, is the Triduum came to be Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Isn't that weird? Easter Sunday is not even part of the Triduum. And most of us grew up in the church where that was true. You know? All right, now let's move to the 1966 reform. So now we're right after the council. Council closed in 65. It drastically changed, altered the character of Lent. Completely threw it out, because we have a whole different understanding of that. Paul VI lifted the obligation of fasting except on Good Friday. Well, it's Ash Wednesday now as well. Lent rapidly degenerated into a liturgical and spiritual vacuum. If we didn't fast, what do we do? If we didn't give up something, what do we do? Because any other comprehension of the season was completely lacking. I certainly didn't understand. Lent was just simply a disciplined period of giving up. I didn't understand anything more about it. What's the remedy? Where are we today with this? Appropriate and disseminate a practical understanding of the 40 days based on the older tradition. Foster a sacramental approach to fasting. What is a sacrament? An outward sign of an invisible grace. So what is fasting? Fasting is the outward sign. And it's not the not eating the food, it's the hunger we feel. Now that's the outward sign. And what is the inward grace? The life that God gives us that comes primarily through Holy Communion, but also through Eucharist, but also through all the good we do to care for each other and so on. So fasting is a sacramental sign, and in the early church, fasting was understood as a sacrament with a capital S. The 7 sacraments, as we know it, don't get enumerated until the 13th century. That's pretty late. There are a lot of other sacraments in the early church. Fasting being one of them. Something else incredibly important is the Triduum now goes back to the earlier tradition of Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Or officially it's defined as sundown on Holy Thursday until sundown on Easter Sunday. Our compromise with the changes is we kept Ash Wednesday, and I think because that's so popular, that to eliminate it would have caused a bit of consternation in the church. But as we see, we still don't have 40 fast days because of the solemnities that come in there. And then one last comment about fasting is fast is sacramental. It's an outward sign of an invisible grace or reality. It's sacrament, and then it uses physical realities, hunger and thirst, to point to divine realities, union with God through participation in heavenly food. So I do recommend some form of fasting during Lent. You can't do a strict fast. We're all of an age where most of us are taking medication that has to be taken with food. For Pete's sake, eat the food with the medication. But I think all of us have things in our life that we know we've gotten into a bad habit of eating that isn't particularly good for us, that we could eliminate. As I was preparing for this Lent, I became very aware that I have become addicted to sugar. I'll eat it in any way, shape, or form. When I go to the mother house every day, visit sisters, take care of little odds and ends, and exercise and all this stuff. But the first thing I do when I walk in is I make a beeline to the dining room to see if there's leftover desserts on it. And the food staff knows it, so the stickers put it out for me. That's just a bad habit I got into. I don't need to go over there and eat. I'm kind of undoing the exercise I do for one thing. But I don't need to be pouring sugar into me. If I'm writing a text, I finished a chapter that's due not too far in the future. It's an academic work, and it was a tough text for me to write on baptism, but from an ecumenical perspective. I'm Catholic through and through, and I have a hard time writing ecumenical pieces. And what do I do when I'm doing that kind of writing? I'll have a box of chocolate sitting next to my computer, and I'll eat a pound in about an hour. That's not healthy, folks. So, becoming aware that that's what snuck into my life, then I kind of went back to my, young child giving up candy. But this was giving up the sugar because I was eating too much of it, and that's not good for us. And one of the commandments is to take care of our bodies. Our bodies are the temple of the Holy Spirit, so we want to take care of them. So, and it certainly doesn't affect, in fact, it improves my diet to get rid of some of the sugar. My sister has a terrible addiction to salty junk food. Chips of all kinds, That'd be a good thing to give up, because most of that stuff has no nutritional value whatsoever. So there's ways, I think, of fasting from food, fasting from certain kinds of drink. That I used to be a big Coke fan, and so for several Lents in a row, I gave up Coke for the whole thing, and then all of a sudden, I just quit drinking Coke. And then, but what happens is, I can't give up Coke now because I don't drink it. Next year, I probably won't give up going into the dining room to get the leftover desserts because I haven't been doing it. And so somebody says, well, but don't you run out of things to do? The answer is no. No. It's amazing. It's amazing how things happen. But remember, these disciplines aren't simply for their own sake. They're to bring us closer to God. In this case, being a healthier me is bringing me closer to who God wants me to be. Prayer. We all pray every day. So we can take a look at our prayer life and say, where can I deepen it? For me this year, I became aware that I'm good at setting time every day aside for prayer. But when I finished reading and praying Liturgy of the Hours and then spent a half an hour on my own meditation, most of it was preparing my day. So what I've been working on this Lent in prayer time is not, I didn't increase my prayer time. I just became more aware of the distractions during prayer time, and what can I do about that? Prayer should be focused on God, not on how I can get through my day getting more work done. You hear what I'm saying? And then almsgiving, I make it a point every day when I go over to Salem Heights this year, because I'm aware of some of the sisters over there pretty lonely. Sounds crazy, living with 40 women, how can you be lonely? I make it a point to find somebody to say hello to, how are you doing? Because some of those gals go all day and hardly ever talk to anybody. So there's all kinds of ways, you know somebody in a care center up here. I'm always amazed when I go to visit over at Emma Hall, how lonely the people are over there. Because so many people are in these care centers and they never get visitors. Just a phone call, adopt somebody, and it's amazing what a beautiful relationship can develop from that. So I gave you some examples from my own life in terms of what I'm dealing with, and I think all of us need to take a look at our own lives and say, what in my life can I improve in terms of prayer, fasting, and almsgiving, in terms of my relationship with God, my relationship with self, and my relationship with others. And work on that, forming good habits around those relationships. Good habits that when Easter comes, I don't pop the sucker in my mouth. I'll probably buy some chocolate. But we form good habits that carry over into deepening relationships with each other. All right, let's take a look at the second paper we have. I don't know, the second paper in the back of the first one. I don't know how to do that. And that is, I want to take a quick look at the Lenten lectionary. The lectionary, I've talked about this before, it's just an absolutely marvelous document, I think. We kind of hear it Sunday by Sunday or day by day, and we never think to put it together, but there's a rhyme and reason how that thing is put together. Before we look at the Lenten Gospels and what's happening, I want to mention first readings. Usually the first reading on Sunday accords with the Gospel. You can find a parallel story or theme or something, so you can always connect the first reading to the Gospel. That doesn't work during Lent. During Lent, the first readings are a series chosen to give us a glimpse into salvation history. What has God done throughout, from the beginning of creation throughout biblical times to draw us closer to God, closer to salvation? When I was preparing Sunday Mass last Sunday and I read the first reading, what the heck has this got to do with the Gospel? Then I remembered, dummy, it doesn't have anything to do with the Gospel. And I can't remember what the first reading was last Sunday. Can anybody recall? I can't either, it's completely gone. Anyway, go back, if you got a daily misled at home, go back and look at last, oh, you got one, what was it about, please? But it hit me, it's got nothing to do with it. Is it, Nineveh, is it Job? No, not Job. Who was called Jonah? Thank you. Is the Jonah story part of the Jonah story? Mm-hmm. Sunday March 8th. Oh, it was the Abram story. Yeah, Abram called to leave Aram and go to a new land. And I was like, what's that got to do with the Transfiguration? One that I started playing, new life and all that. No. It's just, we go through various salvation stories from the first reading. So don't try to connect it to the Gospel because it doesn't work. And when priests try, they go through all kinds of contortions during homilies to connect the first reading to the Gospel. You missed this class in liturgical year. All right, the second reading during Lent will carry forth some kind of Lenten theme, frequently conversion and repentance, which are the primary themes for Lent. So those two readings kind of go on their own track all the way through Lent. But I want to take a quick look at the Gospels because there's a marvelous progression in the Lenten Gospels. And each horizontal line sets off some groups of Sundays that fit together. First, well, I got Ash Wednesday down. We've already talked about penance, fasting, religious acts, and almsgiving. And remember, we're not doing this for our own personal accolades. Jesus says you go into your room and close the door so nobody, if somebody's praising you for your Lenten penances, well then you already have your grace, you know. All right, I want to look at Lent 1 and 2. Lent 1, remember, a week ago, the gospel was the temptation of the desert. Makes good sense, huh? We start our own Lenten desert by hearing about Jesus' temptation in the desert. And that's fine, that makes good sense. It's a good place to start Lent. That's the 40 days and all of this. And then for years I puzzled. Then the second Sunday of Lent, we're up on the mountaintop with Transfiguration, which is kind of Easter. I'm thinking, what in the world? I'm just getting into this wallowing stuff, and now you want me to be on the mountaintop. It doesn't make sense. And it took me forever in some of my own development of theology to go, duh! You know, what we have in those first two Sunday Gospels of Lent is a nutshell of the Paschal mystery. A nutshell of our dying and rising with Christ. Whenever there is a dying, whenever I die to myself for the sake of the other, there's always going to be a rising. There's always going to be new life. So what happens is we begin Lent with temptation in the desert and facing our own sinfulness and how much it costs us to keep facing that sinfulness. And on the other hand, then the very second Sunday, we're given a glimpse of the mountaintop. We're given a glimpse of why we enthusiastically embrace going out in the desert. Because ultimately what we're about is the mountaintop. And in Scripture, a mountaintop is always a place of theophany, a place of God revealing God's self. And my goodness, how God wasn't revealed, you know, on the Mount Tabor and Transfiguration, where Jesus simply glows, you know. And of course, Peter, James, and John, all kids, they want to build tents and stay put. This is pretty good. and what happens? You know, nope, we've got to go down off the mountain and live our life. But because we've had the mountain experience, we know what our plain experience, you know, down in the valley, we know where that goes. We know what that's all about. So I think the first two Sundays of Lent just form a beautiful package. And we have to put them together or we miss the package. The next three Sundays form a package, but each year has its own flavor, if you will, revealing something different to us. We're in year A, so what we have in Lent 3, 4, and 5 are three long gospels. These are long gospels from John. Three gospels that remind us of baptism. So if you have RCIA in your parish, those to be baptized will have what are called the scrutinies, which are ancient prayers, kind of looking at are you ready type thing. And those three gospels are chosen because they're baptismal themes. So Lent 3, the Samaritan woman and water at the well. Give me this water, which I'll never have to go back to the well again, never thirst again. Jesus cures a blind man, and in John's gospel, blindness or is lack of faith and sight is faith. So it's a matter of the gift of faith. And then Lent 5 is easy with the raising of Lazarus, very definitely foreshadowing the resurrection. During year B, where we read Mark's gospel, the theme through those three Sundays is Paschal mystery, the dying and rising mystery of Christ. We have to surrender ourselves. We have to give ourselves over if we're going to rise with Christ. So Lent 3, as the Gospels, the money changers, destroy this temple, and in 3 days Jesus will rebuild it. They all said the man's crazy. We've been working on this building for how many years now? And he's going to rebuild it in 3 days? Give me a break. And then the end of the Gospel is when he was talking about the temple of his own body. You know, you can destroy me. You can kill my body. That's not the end of the story. That's not the end. The end of the story is life. The next Sunday, the message of Nicodemus. Nicodemus is a Pharisee who's coming to Jesus at night for instruction because he's afraid of the other Pharisees. And this is the story about you have to re-enter, you have to be born again. And Nicodemus is saying, I'm a grown man. That's going to be a little rough on my mom. and again, Jesus is speaking figuratively about that, but basically I've come to save. And then the Lent 5 is the gospel about the grain of wheat must die. If the grain doesn't go into the ground and die, new life can't shine forth. I was thinking today driving up, I had pounding rain in Dayton, but as I came north, it got a little bit more gentle, and the wind picked up. And just to kind of experience that gentle rain on those green fields and thinking, oh, that wheat is really happy today. It wasn't a soaking, I didn't see any fields that were flooded, but just a beautiful rain. And I thought, yeah, the wheat seed has to die, and with the water that God provides, it rises to new life. Now finally in year C, we read from Luke's gospel, the theme running through those 3 Sundays is reconciliation. Being reconciled, being brought together again with somebody with whom we're alienated. Let 3, repent or be destroyed. Let 4, prodigal son, probably the most famous of our reconciliation stories. And I always like to think, who's the prodigal one? Who's the prodigal? The son certainly wasted his inheritance, but the real prodigal one is the father. Because it was the father who, I love it, when the father didn't wait for the son to come to him. When the father saw the son in the distance, he went out to the son. And that's how our Father in heaven does with us. He doesn't wait for us to come to him. He comes to us. And then the wonderful story in Lent 5 is the woman caught in adultery. And we kind of hear the end of that story when they all walk away and Jesus says, is there no one here to condemn you? And she said, sure, I made it again, We missed the last point of that gospel. We have to start listening for it. Neither do I condemn you, but go and sin no more. The gospel doesn't tell us what happened, but I suspect she was touched by Jesus to the point where she sinned no more. She sinned no more. Have a good rest of the Lent. Next week we'll look at Treacle and Easter. God bless you. People going home. We'll see you a week Thursday.
Thank you very much for coming. We do have a donation box here. All the donations stay at the shrine. Right now we're working on paying for a new set of vestments. All the vestments here are over 60 years old. They need replaced, so the Adoration Guild is donating towards a new ordinary times vestment. That's where the donations will go.
Thanks to you, yeah.
Yes, thanks to the Adoration Guild. And I have some cards here telling about the Adoration Guild. If you're interested, I'll hand you one on the way out.
And also
Thank
those,
you very much.
you have a 3rd page with some reflection points. You can do those on your own.